I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. My colleague Jyotsna and I are co-presenting the webinar this morning. So we really appreciate you all joining us. If you're on the call, it might be that you have a startup idea you're looking to pursue. Could also be that you work within a more established company, but want to build out some technology to make your business more efficient or whatever your goals might be. That's awesome. I think this is going to be really relevant content for you all. And again, we want to be just a good resource for questions too. So feel free to type those or ask at the end. So my, part of the presentation here at the beginning is mostly just to kind of give you all a little context on who we are and why we are presenting on this, hopefully why we have credibility on this topic. So this will be kind of brief, and then we'll get into like the real meat of the presentation. So if we'll go to the next slide, please. And again, all right, so a little bit about Tyrannosaurus Tech. So we are like a top-rated custom design and software development agency. So we're here in Atlanta. I suspect probably most of y'all on the call are local. So we're here in Virginia Highlands. We work with folks all over the country, but the vast majority of our clients are here. And essentially, we have a team of really sharp developers and designers that we work with our clients to build out typically web or mobile applications. In some instances, we'll do websites or things like clickable prototypes for an early stage concept. But we really are full service in the sense that we'll work with people often from like true idea stage up to kind of deploying an application, maintaining it, enhancing the functionality as more people adopt it. And yeah, so kind of wherever you are in the process, I think we do have kind of expertise, where we can help at least point you in the right direction or give you feedback on what you're working on. So as far as our drivers, what gets us out of the bed in the morning, if you will, most of our team are engineers, right? So they thrive on solving complex problems and really looking for ways to kind of inject technology into businesses that brings efficiency or drives more revenue, or again, whatever the goals might be. We're very design first in terms of how we approach projects and kind of our paradigm on building out digital products, and just kind of boils down to, we of course want to build great back-end technology and logic, but the vast majority of users, of course, are really just interacting with the front end of an application. It needs to be intuitive. It needs to drive the right user behaviors. It needs to be something that's sticky, that your users are really going to adopt. And a little more just about our company. We're very involved in the Atlanta tech community. We run a few different meetups. So, like this one where you probably found out about this webinar. We're always trying to put good educational content out there. We work with a lot of local entrepreneurs that are kind of trying to figure things out, frankly, with a technology product they want to build. So we love doing this kind of stuff. We're fortunate to have gotten a lot of recognition in the space. Definitely encourage you all to check out some of our customer reviews. We've been rated essentially a top app development design company, that sort of thing in the area. And mostly this is just based on our portfolio and then reviews that our customers have provided. So yeah, these are a few folks we've worked with. It's a pretty eclectic group in a cool way. So we've worked with, much bigger companies like a Porsche, which is very exciting. But then we've worked with much smaller startups that folks have never heard of at this stage, that are still early stage, or some like Sidekick or Gather that you all might see that are very well funded at this point and have got a lot more press. So it's really fun. We look at kind of different challenges every day. And so that's just a little bit about us, so you kind of know where we're coming from. And then, yeah, I think I will now leave it to Jyotsna to get into the true content of the webinar.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Richard. So now we'll get started on the main topic, and we'll talk about why you need an app, what are the different stages of an app, and how to scope your app. Of course, all the different steps involved in scoping your app, like customer discovery, features, technical specifications, what are the costs, and how you could fund your app. And then we'll get into question and answer. So as Richard mentioned, you can use the feature to the hand button so that we can, towards the end, we can unmute you and you can have a chance to ask your questions, or you can also use the question box and we'll try to get to those questions if possible during the conversation. If not, definitely have some time towards the end. So getting started, the first question might be, why do you even need an app? So I would definitely, encourage you to, validate your idea first. If you're just looking to do that, you might not necessarily need an app at this point. There are a lot of other ways you can validate an idea. So, for example, you can build landing pages. There are companies who've built landing pages to see if people are, signing up, are interested. We'll show you some samples as well. If you're, have a process like a marketplace where you want to connect vendors to users, you can start that process manually, use Excel sheets. So, there are, like I said, there are different ways to validate an idea, and an app doesn't have to be the way to do that. You would think about, going and building that app out once you're pretty sure about your idea, as well as, at some point, if it's a manual process, then of course technology can definitely make it more automated and help increase efficiency. So apps, obviously, like I said, are a great idea to get started. So you have an actual product in your hands. You can start getting customers onboarded. It can help improve the efficiency of the product. You can obviously increase your user base. It can be a new marketing tool or revenue channel. So for a lot of stores out there, nowadays there are apps. Every store has an app so that they can cover a larger market share. You can have like blogs and other tools that can engage your customers. And also improve the experience. A lot of search capabilities. You can build recommendation engines, like if other customers are purchasing this. So all in all, apps can really do a lot. And of course, today data collection is also really big. So you can use that to get a lot of insights to help, like I said, use machine learning AI to build those recommendation engines. Once you've decided, like I said, to build your app, there are also various different stages of an app. So understanding, what stage you like to start building at would be really helpful. You don't have to necessarily build a product. Uber, the app that we use today is not what it started with. So definitely thinking small first. If it's at an idea stage, then definitely first going with either a clickable prototype or an MVP phase is what we recommend. To give you an example of an MVP, so this is one that we built for our clients. You can see it has like, the front end here. So it's not completely something that you scrap, but it's definitely something you can show to your customers, get a lot of feedback. So you can click on the start discovery process. It will walk you through the entire customer flow so that your users can get a sense of your vision, what your app brings to the table. You can select various different things. You can click here. You're just not saving anything, so there's no back end to this, but there's definitely a front end so that your users, investors can get a sense of what you're looking to build in your idea. So we definitely encourage you, to start with the clickable prototype. A lot of times we also build a clickable prototype for our customers before we start coding, because again, it's a lot easier to iterate on that design phase and use a flow phase first before you actually start coding. The MVP is the minimum viable product. So that's basically, like I said, understanding the core value that your product brings and building a simple app that has all of those features incorporated. And we'll talk about some benefits, but also understanding, beyond the MVP, then you'll go into beta or the V1 stage, which will be, more a better product, so you can start testing out. And then, of course, if you're an enterprise client and you already have or you already have a process that you're looking to automate, you might directly enter into that beta phase. And then, of course, you'll a product is basically a living thing, so you don't really stop at any point. You then focus on scaling and a mature product. So like I said, we'll talk about some benefits of an MVP. This is, again, something we definitely encourage, especially if it's a new idea that you're looking to build or a new product you're looking to build, thinking about the minimal set of features that you require for this product. The benefits of this, of course, you can go to market quicker. You have an actual product that you can start testing, getting feedback. So you're actually building things that your users value rather than what the assumptions that you have. And of course, at the end of the day, this also is a low-cost way to enter the market. So clickable prototypes or MVPs are the best way to get started, especially for new ideas. But if it's a well-defined product or something that you're looking to automate, then you would directly enter into the beta phase. Just to give you some samples of some MVPs, of course, this is an MVP for Buffer. They're a social media platform to automate your tweets or Facebook posts. Again, they just started with Twitter first. Later on, they added Facebook. Now they have Instagram, LinkedIn, but in the beginning they just created a landing page to see if this is something that interests people, and then they also added some pricing to that to see if people would pay for this. So definitely getting started with that route. That also helps you, like if you create a landing page, it also helps you start collecting users that eventually you can use for your testing, feedback marketing. So creating a landing page before you even get started is a good idea. Another example, like I said, is Uber. They started with this, small audience just in San Francisco. It was just an on-demand car booking service. There was no Uber pool. There was no, real-time tracking of the car or data in terms of when you would get your car, what the cost might be. All of those features were added later. So definitely focusing on what is the core value that you bring to your users and starting with that is a good idea. Now that you've decided to scope out your app, the first step would be customer discovery. So the core of customer discovery is really talking to your target audience. So understanding who your user persona is and talking to them, understanding what is the value that they get from this idea, what are the features they would like to see, and then how they would use this in their daily life. Would they use this on the desktop or would they be on the go? So that would decide, whether you're looking to build a web app or a mobile app. So, web apps can be accessible through desktops, through mobile as well. But mobile apps, can only be accessed through the phone. So understanding what they're looking for, rather than building out, we get a lot of clients that are looking to build a mobile app in the beginning, but that might not be the best route because, like I said, it's not something that their customers use daily, that they need to have it on their phone. So doing a lot of, we encourage at least 100 conversations, talking to at least 100 people and doing this customer discovery. I cannot stress how important this is. If you get this step right, it's definitely beneficial towards building that final product, because ultimately, you're building this for your users and not just for yourself. Also doing some competitor research to see what other products are out there and what they provide. The next step would be, now that you've talked to your customers, you can then start understanding your goals, your vision. So, for example, like I mentioned, if you're looking to build a web app first, but in the future you do think a mobile app is important, putting that in your broader vision is super important for companies or developers, if you're working with us or another developer, because that way we can build the product accordingly. We can build a backend that can be reused because we know that there will be a mobile app coming in the future. So understanding your broader vision, your goals, also understanding what are the metrics you need to demonstrate that value. Like I said, you've talked to your customers, so you understand what value it brings. So having those metrics to show that, so you can show ROI, is definitely important. What might be your business model, your monetization? Are they willing to pay for this? We'll decide, how you'll monetize this app. What might be your future marketing and app promotion activities? Again, you can, if you don't have any users, setting up that landing page might be important. If you're a company that already has some branding or design guidelines, again, that's super important to put note at this point, so your developer, has an idea. And then, of course, if you're working on a certain timeline with, some certain timings that you want to launch with, that's also super important to know. So just having all of this in your document is definitely worthwhile for the developer or agency you're working with. The third thing would be your features. So understanding what are the vital features. So like I said, again, thinking, MVP mode, thinking lean, what are the basic core features that your app cannot function without, that it wouldn't show that value. So, for example, if you try to log in, you don't really have to connect with Facebook and Google. You just simply need a login through email, and that will work fine. So that's a vital feature. And the additional features like Facebook or Google login, that's additional nice to have. So it's good to point out what the nice to have features are. Some things your developer will think it's super easy to implement at this point. So that way, if you have some nice to have features which are won't cost you a lot more, super easy to implement, then they can go ahead and do that at this point. But some things might be expensive, and so it might not make sense at this point. What kind of permissions do you need? Do you need different users to have different read views or write views? What kind of offline capabilities do you need? Again, customer discovery will decide a lot of this, because again, if your customers are on the go, then you need offline capabilities. So having those discussions to decide what kind of features are necessary from the get-go is important. What kind of third-party services you need? Do you need like Stripe or for payment services? Do you need any text services? Do you need any data collection? What kind of reporting you would like to see to show those values or those metrics, to make sure you're expressing or showing the value of your product. Finally, we'll also talk about technical specifications. Again, these questions, of course, you might not be able to answer all these questions at this point, but definitely having them in your document and then having these discussions with whoever you work is super important, because again, based on your customer discovery, what kind of devices you'd like to support with your initial product. Are you just looking at iOS? If it's a product you're building, for example, for an Apple Watch, you might just want to build for iOS right now and later for Android. So just understanding what you're looking to build, what devices you're looking to support, what kind of languages, if you have some specific languages that you'd like to build in. If you're a health app, then what kind of security might you need, like there are a lot of like HIPAA rules that you have to consider, what kind of maintenance you would require. So just having all of these in your document is super helpful, and having those conversations with whoever you work with is super helpful. Finally, we'll talk about bioframing. So bioframing is basically the navigation patterns of the user flow. So every single user flow. So, like I said, you start with the login page, then you go to the home page. So defining all of that is definitely the first step of building, starting to build out this app. So definitely thinking about that and providing that to your developer. You can use tools like InVision or Balsamic, but if you're not familiar with these tools, then you can also just create some flowcharts. So for example, here on my screen, you can see these are some samples, and quickly drawing it out, sketching it out, so that your every single screen, that will really help your developer understand the user flow. And we then, a lot of times, like I said, when we work with our clients, this is the first step where we work on every single screen. We provide wireframes for every single screen, because it's a lot easier to iterate at this point than to go ahead and build and then change everything. You can use this to get a lot of feedback, and that ways you can also make sure that both the client and the developers on the same page. So this is part of our design process. So like I said, design is not just about the colors and the font. It's more about the user experience, the user flow. So this is part of that UI UX process that we follow. So definitely a very important process in building out your product and making sure you have every single view of this app laid out in terms of wireframes. Finally, we'll talk about cost and funding. So of course, there, like I said, there's the design costs, there's the development costs, but there's also marketing costs. Once you launch your app, there's this huge space you're entering where if you don't have any users, of course you'll have to start marketing your app. And so what those costs might look like for you. Like I said, a product is a living thing, and so there's constant maintenance, constant updates, constant new features that you might need. So what the maintenance cost might look like, and then finally also the functional services. So if you have Stripe or text messaging integrated, or if you're using some cloud services like AWS, there's a cost factor associated with it. So understanding all of these costs is super important, so you can plan out, the next 1-2 years with your product. And of course, there are various different ways you can fund your app. So, bootstrapping, crowdfunding, investors, friends and family. But it's also important to understand what your budget is for building this app, as well as for the next 1 or 2 years, because if you share that with your developer, it can help your developer or the company you work with make the right decisions, and also share what path you'll choose. Building an app is almost like building a home. So you can you can build something in like 6 figures, you can build something lower. Once we know what your budget is, we can definitely guide you accordingly and make sure we're choosing like the right technologies, so you don't run out of money. So these are, like I said, a few steps that we think are super important as you get started with building your app. And we'll now get into the question and answers. These are just some commonly asked questions that we have that we can address if any of you think you want to talk about this. If not, I'm not sure if we have any questions here at this point.
Not right now, but yeah, I would encourage y'all. There's a few options. You can, again, use the chat. You can pose something in the questions section, or like you can also indicate kind of a raised hand, and we're happy to like unmute you if you want to kind of ask your question out loud. That's great too. So yeah, we would love to field any specific questions if they're different than kind of the common questions we've got listed here.
Yeah, so I mean, until we get some questions out there, maybe I'll just try to address a few things here that you see on my screen. So in terms of costing, that's obviously something we get a lot in terms of, what it might cost to build an app. So again, that's a very hard question to answer and estimate. But I would say, there are low cost ways to build your product. So clickable prototypes, that is something you can enter with 10-15K range. These are just starting ranges. Of course, like I mentioned, you can, even a prototype can go way higher, but if you have about a 10-15K range, that is something decent that you can start with for a prototype. If you're looking for an MVP, again, we think for a simple app, at least somewhere between the 25-30K range is something that would make sense. There are also other ways based on your budget. So like I mentioned, there's also the no code development that could get you to build an MVP faster, and we can definitely help with that. We also have an event coming up on no code development on November 6th, so you can check out our meetup again, or feel free to send me an email and I'll send you the invite for the event. So that's in WeWork in Midtown on the 6th of November, where we will be having startups who built their MVPs with no code talking about their experience. So just to give you a sense of what no code is. So basically, it's a way to build an app today, using some drag and drop features. So of course, there's not a lot of customization that you can do, but you can definitely get started with some, basic, simple workflows, kind of very similar to what, WordPress or Wix is doing for websites. Similarly, you can use a lot of no code. There are a lot of platforms out there that can help you get started building on your MVP. So those are some ways, low cost ways to get started. But apart from that, an app can go, it can be, like I said, 6 figures and up. So it really depends on what features you need. So even talking about your budget, sharing that with the developer you work with, super helpful. So that ways they can, kind of guide you on what makes sense, what technologies make sense based on your budget.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add to that is if anyone on the line, again, is thinking of, building out some type of application or, doing a startup, if you will, we're always happy to talk. We can, after a fairly brief conversation, 30 minutes or something, we can get a high level sense of what you're trying to accomplish and kind of give you our, kind of off the cuff impressions. We're always happy to do that. Obviously, there's no cost associated with that or anything. We can speak pretty quickly to like, yeah, this is fairly straightforward. It might be between X and Y, or this is a lot more involved. But what we usually do when folks really want to get a dialed-in estimate is we'll host like a more in-depth, what we call a discovery workshop with some of our teams, so like a developer and a designer, to work to really define the scope, really put together a more formal estimate. We'll provide like what technologies we recommend, that sort of thing. So there's a couple ways to kind of dip your toe in the water just in terms of getting some valuable feedback from our team without, pulling the trigger fully on building a full-fledged app or something like that. So just want to encourage you all to feel free to reach out to us, if you're kind of in those early stages trying to understand what you're looking at, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like I said, some of the other questions that we had in mind was, very quickly, whether you should, build an iOS or Android. Again, the customer discovery phase will help kind of decide that. But of course, you don't have to make a decision in terms of iOS or Android. Today, you can do cross-platform development. That ways, you can build directly for both iOS and Android. In some cases, you might select iOS, or either if it's, if you're trying to build an app for a wearable device, for instance. So if you're trying to build an app for an app watch, you might start with iOS. Or for some reason, if your user persona, heavily uses iOS, then that might make sense. So definitely, the customer discovery would decide that. But like I said, today, you don't have to make that decision. You can build for both. Then there are, other questions in terms of, whether you should use offshore or.
I'm gonna interrupt you only because we do have kind of a live question.
Oh, we do. Okay.
So this is from Ross. Appreciate it, Ross. Thank you for breaking the ice and giving us a good, fresh question. So the question is, how do you know what coding language to select? It's a great question. It's like a lot of things in life. I would say there is no right answer. Developers are very opinionated in terms of what language or framework, they think is appropriate. I think there's always degrees of truth in what they're saying, but again, there's typically no right answer. There are languages, of course, that if you are trying to build out a mobile app, for example, you need to do that in appropriate languages and frameworks for mobile app development. So what Johnston was alluding to earlier is for mobile, we do React Native, which is JavaScript based, and it's cross-platform so that you can essentially write one app that'll run on iOS and Android devices. You wouldn't, want to try to build your mobile app, strictly on Ruby on Rails or something that really is not for a mobile app. So there's different languages that have strengths over others too. So there are frameworks like Ruby on Rails, which we do a fair amount of work in, that's really great for building apps pretty quickly and relatively low cost, because this framework has like a lot of great resources kind of built into it that save you from recreating the wheel. But then if you were doing something, let's say that was super data heavy, you might instead opt to use a language like Python that runs faster. So there's a lot of things to consider there. But again, my overarching feedback is like there's not strictly a right answer. There's a few factors that would contribute to that. And then the other thing I would stress is, a lot of folks don't want to hear this, but it's not uncommon to like build out your initial application. And then in time, if you're getting very successful and getting a lot of users, which is a great problem to have, you may end up ultimately like reworking parts of the application or incorporating a new language that better accommodates for the scale you've reached. So it's always ongoing. Like, development is never done. And again, in a good way, if your app or your product is getting a lot of users, you're going to have to kind of maintain and always be supporting that app. So I wouldn't overthink necessarily where you start as far as the technologies you're using, as long as they generally make sense for what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I would also say, making sure there's enough of a community out there for that kind of language that you're using. So a lot of times folks kind of, build in something where it's really hard to find a replacement. So definitely especially if you're working with like a developer or a freelancer, making sure that the community is super active, there's a lot of support, so you can quickly replace that person for whatever reason if it doesn't work out. So yeah, making sure about that, and then also making sure that whatever technology you use is fairly advanced in terms of, you're not building old school using really old technologies that are not supported anymore or might be outdated soon. So definitely researching and making sure whatever technology you build in is geared up for today, constantly has updates, has a big online community. Those will give you some ideas of that, this technology kind of makes sense. So doing some research on that would be helpful.
This is another really good question we just got from Carlton. What would be some of the resources like built into a language? Because I kind of referenced that. So again, really good question. Like I guess the succinct way I would answer that, I'm just going to go back again to like the Ruby on Rails example, because that's probably where I'm most familiar. But Ruby is a programming language, but then Rails refers to this framework. And so the framework, generally is what I'm referring to when there's resources available. So with Ruby on Rails, for example, there are what are called gems that are out there that are kind of small code bases that are open source and can be leveraged and incorporated into an app. So there's a lot of things that you might be building into your application that are really common across various tools. So like if you're building a chat feature, or if you're building an app where there's a login process and you want password encryption. Like if we're doing that, we're not going to build password encryption from scratch. That just doesn't make sense. That wouldn't be a good use of anyone's time or resources. So we can leverage things like that, that are kind of available. And similarly with a framework like Rails, there's kind of commands to like quickly build out a database, for example, rather than writing every individual line of code there. And these are all just kind of the positives of like more modern frameworks and development processes. There's still a ton of work, but like there's just a lot of kind of bridges that have been built so everyone's not reinventing the wheel every time they're building out a new app. Hopefully that is helpful. And yeah, Carlton said like libraries, and yeah, I think that's also a good way to think of it for sure. So we've got another question from Martha, which is a great question. I'm happy to answer it, or you're welcome to, or we can both chime in, whatever you think.
Yeah, I mean, I think the customer discovery process is obviously super helpful to know if your idea is valuable in the first place, whether your users want something like this. And then, like I said, you can set up landing pages to start seeing if people sign up for your idea. This is things that people are looking for. Another way, of course, is to use, there are a lot of resources out there to look at, what are people searching for on Google? So Google has its own platform for AdWords, but even if you don't use the AdWords, you can use the keyword planner to understand what kind of keywords are people searching for. So I think those are some ways in which you can start off with your idea, knowing that it's something at least people are looking for. But ultimately, success is it's very hard to define success. It really depends on, first of all, what your idea of successful is. When you get started, is your idea of success just having enough users signed up, or do you need to be making money right, from the start? So sometimes, it's really hard to understand what success means. for your app. So just defining what success means for you or for this app at that stage. At an MVP stage, it's really hard to make money. And so just understanding that at that stage, having users use your app, engage with your platform might be your idea of success. So I think it's really hard to know if it will be successful or not, but definitely those customer discoveries will help you better understand if people are willing to pay for something like this.
Yeah, and I guess the only thing I'll add there is, we definitely make a point of trying to like be good stewards of technology, for lack of a better way to describe it. So it is pretty common for folks to come to us with an early stage idea, and we're kind of like, hey, this sounds awesome, but before you just start throwing money at building something out, here's what we'd recommend from, as far as like a customer discovery process, or as Jyotsna mentioned, like we might be like, hey, sounds like really a clickable prototype would be a great next step to get this in front of people, get further feedback, understand if what you're building really solves the problem you think you've identified. And then of course I think there is a big distinction between your kind of friends telling you it sounds like a good idea versus folks really being willing to pay for something and change their behaviors to use something new. But again, there's really good resources in Atlanta too. So those of you who are local, ATDC, which is associated with Georgia Tech, they have a great program for startup founders where they really guide that customer discovery process. And so like they, for example, make new entrepreneurs, or I guess anyone launching a new idea, they make them do 100 customer discovery sessions. So it's oftentimes like pretty tedious and not what you're dying to do, but yeah, I think you're glad you invest that time so you don't build something out that ultimately isn't used, which of course is what no one wants. Any other questions to kind of chat out here via the chat box?
I don't see it yet.
Okay.
Yeah, and feel free to, it doesn't end here, so feel free to like email us. We're happy to even chat after the webinar with any of you folks that are interested, have an idea, talking further. Feel free to send us an email and we can set up some time to chat. We're local in Virginia Highlands, so right here. And as I mentioned, we also have an event coming up, so you can attend that, meet some other founders as well as meet us in person. So feel free to check out our event. It's free. It's on no code. So definitely something that I think all of you guys would be interested in.
Cool. Well, we really appreciate it. And then we will also follow up with the attendees and provide, we have basically a white paper we've put together on this topic too, that it's actually like a good bit more thorough than even just the slides that speak to it high level. So we'll share that with you all too. And
the recording of this.
And the
session.
recording.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, we're happy to be a resource in any way we can. Please reach out and we appreciate y'all's time.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Cool.